This is The Nightlight. I'm Joshua Johnson. I want you to listen to this video. I found it on Instagram this week and it busted me up. You're going to hear the video of two women reacting to the original. So it's the women making the video. They're playing the original overlaid on top of them reacting to it. And it cracked them up, kind of like it cracked me up. Listen.
So I got jury duty. I'm not going. That sounds stupid. So you're telling me there's a guy who did a crime and you need me to show up so you can convince me whether or not he did it? I didn't go to law school. Who gives a what I think? Like a jury of my peers are dumb as dude. I'm just confused because why isn't it a job? Why is jury duty a thing? Why don't you just hire jury people full time and have them clock it and make them go to law school for it? Why can't you just get an associate's degree in jury duty? Why do we have to grab randos off the street? NPCs. Why do I have to convince a Lifetime Fitness front desk employee, an Arby's shift lead, and a librarian that I'm not guilty for murder?
So this guy who didn't get why everyday people are on juries, he either slept through civics class, his teacher sucked, or he never got taught. Actually, he's a comedian. His name is Demetrius Fields. He does stand-up, and he posted this back in June of 2022. By the way, when he said NPCs, NPC means non-player character or non-playable character. It's a term from role-playing games and video games. These are like background characters and enemies and so on, characters that you do not manipulate. But he asked a fair question. Why do everyday citizens serve on juries? Why don't we leave that to lawyers or judges or people with formal legal experience? It's a good question. I'll answer it for you in just a minute, but it's the kind of a question that a civics class would answer. And now is a good time to think about it because this weekend we observe Constitution Day in the United States. On September 17th, 1787, the founders signed the Constitution. The states ratified it the following year. Now, the Annenberg Public Policy Center, which is at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, just released its annual Constitution Day Civics Survey. They surveyed nearly 1,500 people online to assess their knowledge of civics. The margin of error is 3.5 percentage points. Let's see how you do with some of the questions that tripped up quite a lot of people. First, let's start with one that a lot of people, most people, got right. Can you name all three branches of government? Think about it. Three branches of government. You know them? Maybe you can name two, maybe one. Okay, well, 2/3 of Americans, 66% of the people in this poll got them all. 10% could only name two, 7% could only name one, 17% could not name any of the three branches of government. By the way, the three branches are executive, legislative, and judicial. Fortunately, 2 out of 3 Americans knew all three. Okay, let's go to a tougher one. The one from the top of the show. Don't Google it. Don't Google it. The 5 rights protected in the First Amendment. Can you name all 5? Think about it. I bet you know at least one. No, not that one. No, not that one. What? No. Try again. Okay. I'll give you one more second. Do you know all 5? Most people can name 1 or 2. 46% could name 1 or 2. 30% could name 3 or 4 of them. 20% could not name any. I'm sure you're not in that 20. You must know at least one, right? How many could name all 5? 5% of the U.S. adults that were surveyed got all 5. 5%. Here is the text of the First Amendment. It's only 40 some odd words. It's real short. The First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's the First Amendment. Religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition the government or protest. Now, a surprisingly large number of people, 22%, listed the right to bear arms. That's the Second Amendment, not the First Amendment. Oh, since we're talking civics, sidebar, let's be clear. The First Amendment does not give any rights. None of the amendments gives rights. It protects rights that we already have. The founders believed that we have rights because we exist. Remember the Declaration of Independence, the beginning? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, and by men they literally meant men, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. What does that mean? It means your rights are a function of your existence, your creation. A government's job is, as the Declaration says, to secure these rights. Besides, think about what government was in those days. It was the British monarchy, right? King George III. And that showed the founders that what government giveth, government can taketh awayeth. The whole fight over abortion rights is a perfect example of that. That is why James Madison, who wrote the Bill of Rights, was very astute in the wording. Think about it. He could have just written, the people shall have the right to establishment of religion and have the right to freedom of speech and so on. But the First Amendment tells the government what it cannot do. It does not tell the people what we can do. That's the brilliance behind it. Anyway, back to the quiz. Let's see. This question is going to be tough. What percentage of Supreme Court cases in the past year were decided by a 9-0 or 8-1 vote? What percentage of cases were decided unanimously or nearly unanimously? Between 0 and 100. What do you think the range is? What percentage? Decided unanimously or nearly unanimously? Think about all the cases, not just the ones you hear about on the news. Those tend to be the ones that come down 5-4 or 6-3. But which ones do the justices really see eye to eye on? 9-0 or 8-1? Any idea? You sure? You want to bet on that? You want to put money on it? Okay. Is that really your answer? Okay. The correct answer is between 41 and 60%. It's in that range, 41 to 60% generally. Now, 22% of the respondents got in that range. The other responses were kind of all over the place. On average, people thought about 35% of the rulings were 9-0 or 8-1. That's despite all of the division, the 6-3 conservative liberal split on the court among the justices. About 41 to 60%. Justices typically like to have unanimous rulings because it shows the country that this is actually the consensus, the solid view of the law. That's the point of the Supreme Court, is to interpret the law usefully and reliably. And so from their point of view, the more unanimous they are, the clearer that is. So how'd you do on the quiz? Were you close? Did you embarrass yourself? I hope you didn't embarrass yourself, especially because civics is not taught the way that perhaps it should be taught. Everyone doesn't get that kind of a civic education. I have thrown this word around a lot, and I have not defined it. I defined what AI is. I should define what civics is. Simply put, civics is the study of citizenship. That's all it is. Your rights and responsibilities as a citizen. In the US, a civics education would be things like the 3 branches of government, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and all the other amendments. How voting works, how jury duty works, the Supreme Court, but also things like where your tax dollars go, what happens at a city council meeting, how the state legislature works, how Congress works, what political parties do, how to get involved in them if you choose to. Those are all part of civic education. And there are huge gaps in what's happening with our kids and understanding the future of the country by understanding the past and the present of how it works. There's a center at Tufts University in Boston called the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement, or CIRCLE. It focuses on youth civic engagement. Tufts did a study about Latino youth in the 2022 election, the midterm. And among other things, it asked why the ones who did not register to vote did not register. Only 12% said that it was because they didn't care, right? 29% of all youth said they didn't care. Latinos were more likely to say they were interested than the general population. But in terms of the reasons, the biggest one was not having enough time. 24% of unregistered Latino youth said they didn't have time to register. Among all other youth, it was only 14%, 10 points lower. So clearly there's work to do, especially because there are so many different ways to register to vote. But there are people who see the need for this. That's the good thing. There was a recent op-ed in the New York Times that argued for better civics education as a way to ease our so-called culture wars and to equip young people to engage politically with one another. I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's cool that you can just post something on TikTok and drop your hot take on there and get people to like, share, and subscribe. I would much rather you know how to say that to a person's face and actually get a conversation going. There's room for both, but that second skill, that's not getting taught everywhere. Some places are teaching it. There are a number of states, including Illinois, that require civics for high school graduation, which I think makes a lot of sense. My home state of Florida is paying teachers a stipend of $3,000 to complete its new civics training. The first 20,000 teachers to do it will get the $3,000. Here's the problem. That curriculum was approved under Governor Ron DeSantis and crafted by a number of conservative organizations and conservative and Christian universities. Now look, I do not have a problem with being conservative. You have the right to your politics. But politics is a layer on top of citizenship. You do not have to be partisan to be a good American. This course, the one in Florida, is called the Civics Seal of Excellence. It aligns with this wholesale reshaping of Florida's civics education. This has been a consistent theme of conservative educational advocacy lately, especially after what may go down as one of the most impactful civic texts of the last 100 years. The 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones of the New York Times. That book kind of started all of this, or the backlash did. 1619, by the way, was the year that enslaved Africans were first brought to the colonies. That's why it's called that. The kickback to the 1619 Project was so furious that Nicole Hannah-Jones was denied tenure at UNC Chapel Hill's journalism school. A wealthy donor named Walter Hussman objected to granting her tenure, and the university folded. He, by the way, is the publisher of a newspaper, the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, and he is an alumnus of UNC Chapel Hill, so the irony is spread rather thick. Today, Ms. Hannah-Jones runs a new journalism center at Howard University, which is a historically Black institution in Washington. Also in response to 1619, there's been this really huge push to redefine social studies and civics courses in public school systems, including changing Black history curricula, especially the teaching of slavery, or putting a higher priority on patriotism. But that's the problem. They're defining patriotism wrong. And I don't mean that's an inherent error of conservatism. I know plenty of conservatives who understand this clearly, but this particular political movement is maligning the idea. Put it like this. People like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, people who called out the ills of America's treatment of Black people. Or maybe people like Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who advocated women's suffrage, or people like Harvey Milk, who advocated equality for LGBTQ people. Were they patriots? Would you consider those people patriots? Okay, hold that thought. What about people like George Wallace, the former governor of Alabama? That's the guy who, at his inauguration 60 years ago, famously said, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever." Was George Wallace a patriot? Okay. What about Nick Fuentes, unabashed white supremacist, anti-Semite. He's built a rather sizable online following among young men. Fuentes is 25 years old, by the way. That much hate in that young a man is a conversation for another day. But is he a patriot? Here's the tougher question. Brace yourself. Is it possible that they could all be patriots? If you think there's an easy answer, you need to take a civics class. These thorny, messy, uncomfortable, often infuriating ideas are exactly what citizenship must be about if the United States is to have a future at all. As I've said in the past, democracy is a contact sport. Everyone gets bruises, even the winners. But authoritarianism, ruling through dictatorship and divine right, that's easy and painless as long as you do what you're told. Step out of line and you can get your skull broke. But smoothing over any aspect of America's past, especially the toughest, thorniest issues, smoothing over that dulls our chances for the future. All those rough spots keep us sharp. They make us tough enough to endure whatever the future brings. If civics is not the hardest class you ever take, your teacher did it wrong. So what should a civics education include? Well, in addition to the basic information that we talked about before, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If you have ideas for what a civics education should include, let me know. Joshua@nightlightshow.com or hit me up on social media @JoshuaListening. I would like it to include at least 4 things in addition to everything else. One is media literacy. That is where the battleground for the soul of the country will be fought, has been fought, whether it was Benjamin Franklin impersonating an op-ed writer so that he could write about the early nascent argument for independence, or whether it is the cable news fights of today or anything in between. Our mass media, our modern media, and I do consider social media a kind of mass media. It's fragmented, but it is a mass of people. The media are a core part of that. The way that we use free speech, that shakes the country and shapes the country in lots of ways. And we have to teach young people to be discerning about what they see, hear, read, write, and say. Second thing I'd like, 20th century appreciation. I think young people today don't understand the 20th century. I think some of them feel like the world is capricious and arbitrary. They don't have to look that far back in the past to understand why things are the way they are. All they got to do is look around at what makes their parents and grandparents feel nostalgic. That's why the nostalgia comes up, because it had such an impact. Young people need to know what a dot matrix printer was. Lord Jesus. They need to understand what Soul Train was, or who Ed Sullivan was, or who Father Coughlin or Amy Semple were. They should know why Casablanca had such an impact. They need to know about the birth of networks like MTV, BET, and CNN. They need to understand who Johnny Carson was and who Walter Cronkite was. They need to know about these things so that they get why things are the way they are today. That's the second thing I'd want. Third thing I'd like taught, debate and argumentation. I think this goes without saying, but we need better ways to confront one another over our points of view. The first job of democracy, and I've said this before too, the first job of a democratic government is to prevent political violence. That's job one. The way that we prevent people from becoming violent and vicious in the face of political losses is to give people ways to discuss their politics before election day, before game day. We need more release valves so we learn to view one another humanely even as we vote, so that we realize we're voting on ideas and not just voting to attack individuals. That's where it gets screwy. And we have to teach young people to, this is going to get me in trouble, to not be quite so fragile when it comes to dealing with contrasting points of view, to be able to not default to getting critical, but to getting curious and giving people, frankly, enough rope to hang themselves by a well-placed, well-structured argument, as opposed to just going and losing their cool and exploding when they hear something they don't like and then getting demoralized and despairing or lashing out. We got to teach young people how to navigate that. And then the fourth thing, this is going to sound a little weird, but well, wouldn't be the first time. American optimism. I think we have to talk about why we've had this gung-ho, can-do attitude as a nation. Everything from the founders to the fabulists and everyone in between. I mean, Ben Franklin, P.T. Barnum, Walt Disney, MLK, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama. So much of America's ethos is this can-do attitude. And I wouldn't teach it in a way to make students optimistic, just like that goofy civics program in Florida is to make kids patriotic. I wouldn't do it to make them feel something, but just so that they understand how deeply we as a nation have bought into visions of a brighter tomorrow and projected those visions globally to make us the envy of the world. I would make sure that they understand that, just so it doesn't seem like something to be cynical against, but something to have some empathy for. Back to that guy's question, though. Remember the one at the beginning? The one that they were cracking up for? Why are juries set up this way? Let me play it again. Here's how he asked it.
I didn't go to law school. Who gives a f*** what I think? Like, a jury of my peers are dumb as f***, dude. I'm just confused because, like, why isn't it a job? Like, why is jury duty a thing? Why don't you just hire jury people full time and have them clock it and make them go to law school for it? Why can't you just get, like, an associate's degree in jury tutoring? Like, why do we have to grab randos off the street? NPCs. Why do I have to convince a Lifetime Fitness front desk employee, an Arby's shift lead, and a librarian that I'm not guilty for murder?
That is a good question. And I have to say, after I was done laughing, I felt very convicted because I didn't know the answer either. I was laughing at him and then I was like, oh, shucks, I don't know. Why is it? Ooh, I think I made fun of him. Ooh. And that, yeah, I was doing the I Love Lucy. Ooh. I was like, ooh, I need to go look that up. That's another reference they need to have. I Love Lucy. Anyway, back to the question. Why are juries set up this way? I looked it up. I'm so proud. You want to hear it? Okay, here's why. It dates back to medieval England. It is a safeguard against abuses of power. The crown would interfere with trials in the 13 colonies. They would try to assert that the defendant had no right to a jury trial. This is after the colonies had been established. So every individual colony had laws, kind of home rule laws that protected this right. This is before we had a constitution. Now, during the framing of the Constitution, the founders debated whether these laws, the kinds of laws the states had, well, soon to be states, they were colonies at the time, whether those laws were strong enough. And that is why they added more provisions in the 6th and 7th Amendments to the Constitution. The key that you need to know is the 6th Amendment. I know I asked if you knew the First Amendment. The 6th is one you need to know too. The 6th Amendment reads as follows. I could not have recited this from memory. I know the First Amendment because I learned that in 7th grade journalism class. This was new. Here's what the 6th Amendment says. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against him, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. That's the 6th Amendment. So the reason for our system, for letting, as Mr. Demetrius Fields put it, NPCs serve on juries, it's because they're not in the game. Everyday people, if we pick the right ones, should be able to view the matter more critically, more open-mindedly than someone with deep investments in the case. Obviously not a perfect system, but that's the rationale. And I think we can understand why. You should not be a referee and a player at the same time. That's why. It's a fair question. But think about how much more in our system people don't know based on that Annenberg study. It's really easy to get depressed because some people don't know the basics. And if you're like that, if the state of our union has you feeling pessimistic, please for me, please, 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 don't despair. Remember, we are the nation of more perfect, not perfect. Our founders assumed this idea of constant improvement, iteration, error. Remember, we threw off a government that believed the king was flawless and faultless because God put him on the throne, remember? We're supposed to be better than that. Alexander Hamilton wrote about this in the Federalist Papers after the Constitution was signed. He wrote a series of essays, like 85 essays, published them under the pen name Publius, to try to answer people's questions about why their state should ratify the Constitution. They needed 9 of the 13 to ratify. And he wrote all these long, long essays to try to get people to ratify it and not to start over, because that was one of the arguments. Well, maybe this isn't the right one. Maybe we should start again. The end of the last Federalist paper, the end of that one. And I would read the beginning of Federalist 9 and the end of Federalist 85 if you skip everything else. The end of Federalist 85, the very last one. Here's part of it. I'll skip around a little bit at the ending, but here's what Hamilton wrote. The judgments of many must unite in the work. Experience must guide their labor. Time must bring it to perfection. And the feeling of inconveniences must correct the mistakes which they inevitably fall into in their first trials and experiments. Then he goes on to write, a nation without a national government is, in my view, an awful spectacle. The establishment of a constitution in time of profound peace by the voluntary consent of a whole people is a prodigy, to the completion of which I look forward with trembling anxiety. And at the end, he writes, I dread the more the consequences of new attempts, because I know that powerful individuals in this and in other states are enemies to a general national government in every possible shape. That's from Federalist Paper number 85 by Alexander Hamilton. What is he saying? He's saying this is not going to be perfect, and we shouldn't expect perfection, but we have to do this anyway. A nation without a national government is an awful spectacle. And he called the establishment of a constitution a prodigy. But he also said he had trembling anxiety. That's the point. Allowing ourselves to be this imperfect union and, through our trembling anxiety, do it anyway. We're heading for a big election next year. Don't know if you heard. Some big cities have elections this November. Philadelphia is going to the polls. Houston, Columbus, Indianapolis, Charlotte, and Orlando. So now is a good time for a refresher on civics. I bet there's a frustrated young person in your life somewhere who's feeling powerless about the world and terrible about their ability to improve it or even really affect it. I bet you could do them some good by hearing them out on what these frustrations are. They have every right to be nervous, every right. Then after you hear them out, you can very broadly ask how they feel about their civic knowledge. Not giving advice. As I argued recently, that ain't the key. Just ask and then pause. Let them inquire for themselves, if they want to, about, why are you asking me this? Then, here's what I would respond with. If you don't understand how power works, how could you not feel powerless? If you don't understand how power works, how could you not feel powerless? That might start a conversation if they're open to it, when they're ready. And in that, civics might begin sounding like something worth studying. 2 resources you should know about. One is the National Constitution Center, based in Philadelphia, nonprofit, nonpartisan group. They are fantastic. They're online at constitutioncenter.org. Also, Congress has a website explaining the Constitution. It's constitution.congress.gov. I really hope we can get more of these conversations started because, believe it or not, I consider myself a highly patriotic person. Always have been. I think this is a great country, but I don't expect people to just agree with me. Skepticism is healthy. It's the American way. But so is hope. I think we need to make more room for both, especially for young people, so that the pursuit of happiness will not only make them happy to be in America, but maybe even make them proud. So this episode was a little bit longer, and there's a reason for that. A, I had a lot of things to say. Sorry about that. But also because I'm going on hiatus. I'm going to take some time off from the show until about mid-October. We're 10 episodes in, and thank you for following me for these 10 episodes. If you've missed some of the past ones, I hope you'll subscribe on your podcast app. Go back and listen to them and let me know what you think. This will also give me some time to sort of evaluate the show so far, to step back, see what I like, see what could be better. I also want to work on more segments, more written pieces, finish refining my studio, and there are some other projects that I've been sort of neglecting that I need to put more bandwidth onto. So now is a good time to just step back, breathe a little bit. But do keep in touch on social, keep in touch by email, and I will let you know when the next episode is back. Although if you just follow the show, you don't need me to tell you when the next episode is back. You'll just get the next episode. So if you're not subscribed on your podcast app or on YouTube, please go ahead and do that right away. And I look forward to seeing you in mid-October. In the meantime, please leave a review of this podcast in whatever podcast app you use. If you prefer YouTube, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. It is at The Nightlight Show, or the direct link is youtube.com/@The Nightlight Show. Remember both symbols, /@ The Nightlight Show. Please do like this episode, click the notification bell to get a heads up for new episodes, and of course, hit me up by email or social media on anything that you heard tonight. This program comes to you from Sun Arts Media, dedicated to conversation, creation, and connection. If you want to see this kind of work impact America for the better, please consider supporting the show as a paid subscriber. You can do that online at nightlightshow.com. So, until we meet again in mid-October, I'm Joshua Johnson. Thank you as always for making time for me, and please keep on shining, because someone, somewhere, needs your light right now.